Joining us now by phone from Cairo is Sharif Abdel Kouddous. He is a senior producer for Democracy Now! He grew up in Cairo. He's been back in the city reporting on the uprising there since Saturday. Mr. Kouddous, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
Most of the reporting coming out of Egypt right now says that this protest movement, this uprising, is pretty organic and leaderless. It is not being led by any one group. Having been on the ground there all weekend, is that the impression that you have?
I would have to agree with that, Rachel. This is a leaderless movement that cuts across political lines, cuts across class lines, cuts across gender lines, and it has brought tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Egyptians to the streets of Cairo and other cities across the country in a mass popular uprising, the likes of which many Egyptians, including myself, never thought we would see during Mubarak's reign. In your intro, I heard you talk about Omar Suleiman and Mohammed al-Baradei. Those are not the two poles that people here are considering for a change. What the demands of the protesters have been since day one, since January 25th when this all started, is the ouster of the Mubarak regime. That regime includes Omar Suleiman, and the people say they didn't ask for Mubarak to name a vice president. They didn't ask him to reshuffle his cabinet. What they're calling for is the removal of this political order. This political order that's repressed them, that's kept them poor and hungry, that's imprisoned them and tortured them, and that has completely silenced their voices. And what they're doing now is making their voices heard. Mohammed al-Baradei is certainly a respected figure. His reputation is untarnished. He's a Nobel Peace Laureate. He's the former head of the IAEA. And Egyptians are eager to hear what he has to say. But many that I speak to here say that he's lived out of the country for a long time, that he didn't join earlier street protests. And what a lot of people are calling for is, after Mubarak's ouster, which they are sure they are going to achieve, is to have some sort of coalition transitional government that will include all groups, that will include Mohammed al-Baradei, that will include the Muslim Brotherhood, that will include Ayman Noor, that will include the April 6 Youth Movement and other opposition groups. And just to clarify, all of the main opposition groups have stated they would refuse to negotiate with the Mubarak cabinet. And so the step one of this whole process is the ouster of the Mubarak regime. And, I'm speaking to you right now. It's about 4:20 a.m. Cairo time, and Cairo is quiet. The streets are empty. But in just about 5 hours from now, they're going to be filled for what is expected to be the biggest march of this uprising, the biggest gathering. Hundreds of thousands are expected to gather just a few hundred yards from where I'm speaking to you right now in Tahrir Square. And as you said, the communications have been cut off. It's hard to know exactly what is being planned, but one of the what I've heard is that in addition to gathering at Tahrir, they're going to stage a march towards Mubarak's residence, which is in another part of Cairo. Mubarak himself is in Sharm el-Sheikh in Sinai, but this is a big act of defiance that is being planned. And as you have said also, we have been cut off from the digital world since Friday. I mean, Cairo is one of the biggest cities in the world. It's 18 million people, and we haven't had internet access since Friday. There was one ISP that was open, which was called Noor, and it was available in a couple of hotels and some other places. That was shut down just a few hours ago. We're expecting the cell phones, the Egyptian cell phone networks, to be shut down also. And so this is another form of repression against the protesters that has not been talked about at all. The Obama administration spoke briefly about it when they first shut off internet access, but it has not been talked about since. And if the State Department can call the Mubarak government and call for the release of those 6 Al Jazeera journalists that were arrested this morning, then they can certainly call the government and ask them to turn the internet back on.
Sharif, let me ask you, looking ahead to the protests tomorrow, is there worry or expectation or anxiety about the prospect of state violence, either from the internal security forces, from the different police groups, or from the army?
Well, the internal state security forces were overwhelmed last Friday. They were beaten. This was a battle between the Interior Ministry and the demonstrators, and the demonstrators won on Friday. And we haven't seen any police since then. They've been completely taken out of the city. There's some that have reappeared today, some traffic police, but the really despised police and state security forces have been beaten, and what has replaced them is the military. And the Egyptian people are very close to the military. They do not feel about them the way they feel about the police. They haven't been tortured and repressed by the military. The last time they had an interaction with the military was 1973 when there was a war with Israel. And so a lot of the chants in Tahrir Square are the army, the people, one hand. They have seen protesters carry military soldiers on their shoulders through the crowds of Tahrir, cheering them on. And so they are very convinced that the army will not harm them. The head of the military today said they will not fire on the protesters. So while it remains to be seen what will happen exactly, it's hard to imagine any kind of real violence coming from the military from what I've seen in the last few days.
Sharif Abdel Kouddous, senior producer for Democracy Now! Thank you so much for joining us tonight and for sharing with us your perspective on this. It's really good to have you, Sharif.
Thank you, Rachel.